everyone, this is John Daly. I'm here again with Bernie Goldberg for another episode of the No BS Zone. How's it going today, Bernie?
So far, so good, John. How about you?
I'm doing good, thank you. So today we are going to talk about the state of the presidential race. Kamala Harris's poll numbers have been going up, not just in the national polls, but also in the key swing states. Most polls have her in the lead right now. Bernie, do you think she is indeed the front runner? Is this her race to lose? And if so, what's the reason for that?
I think she is a front runner. Yeah, I do. So I've said this before, John. I'm not making predictions because I'm sharp enough, excuse my immodesty, I'm sharp enough to know that anything can happen as early as later today, let alone an October surprise. That said, if Donald Trump doesn't change his ways, he's going to lose this election. He is going to lose this election. I've got a column coming up in a few days about how his friends, both in the media, like on Fox News, and in the political world, need to get him in a room, lock the doors, and tell him, if you don't change your ways, there's a good chance President of the United States will be named Kamala Harris. And the question, John, is Donald Trump capable of change? I don't think he is.
No, I think, and I agree with you. I think if the election were held today, she would win. Harris still has the momentum. She's drawing big crowds, which is kind of driving Trump a little nuts. You know, even though he draws big crowds himself. But she and Tim Walz are doing a lot of campaign stops right now. I'd say more so from what I'm seeing than Trump is. A lot of people have pointed out how happy Harris and Walz appear to be when they're campaigning. You know, lots of smiles, lots of optimism. Surprisingly, lots of flag waving and talk about freedom and liberty. In some ways, it's at least from an image standpoint, kind of feels like a Republican campaign of yesteryear. To be clear, I think all the talk about freedom and liberty is sort of empty coming from that ticket, you know, when you match it up against their actual policy positions. But I do think it stands in stark contrast to the doom and gloom theme that, you know, Trump and now Vance have latched onto. They're always talking about how the world's on fire, which, you know, in all fairness, that's worked for Trump in the past in some cases. But that actually brings me to my next question that I was going to ask you about, Bernie. By and large, do you think voters are becoming less and less interested in policies and more interested in kind of vibes, you know, the performative stuff, the energy, the personality? I mean, it has to be noted that Vice President Harris, you know, naturally is pretty closely aligned with Joe Biden on policies, which we assumed were unpopular with Americans because of you know, people's concerns with the border and inflation. But those policy positions, and she is changing quite a few, but nothing really seems to be hurting her at this moment.
Yeah, I think issues obviously matter. It's the economy, stupid, has survived all these years because there's truth to it. But you raise a very, very important point. It isn't only issues. People can decide and may very well decide, yeah, I think this candidate is better than this candidate on the issues. But I don't like what this candidate A is better on the issues than candidate B, let's say. But I don't like how candidate A handles himself. I don't like the lies. I don't like the doom and gloom, as you correctly put it. I don't like the darkness of the campaign. You know, I don't agree with that candidate entirely. And I may even agree with that candidate more on the issues than the other candidate. But the other candidate makes me feel better. And I think that really, really matters. Before we move on, you mentioned crowd size, and I want to say something about that. Donald Trump the other day went on Truth Social, his website, his social media website, and he said that the crowd waiting for Kamala Harris in Detroit, a huge crowd, thousands and thousands of people waiting in an airplane hangar, was a fake image. an image generated by artificial intelligence programs. What I'm about to say, I've thought about. This is not off the top of my head. Donald Trump is moving from congenital liar, and he's a congenital liar. I don't care if you're his biggest supporter, you know that he lies all the time. But he's moving from that to something else, and that something else is just plain crazy. I mean, he's saying that he's picking up on conspiracy theories about how the light is shining off of Kamala Harris's plane to make the point that it's not just the plane that isn't there. This is crazy, but also the crowd that isn't there. Now, he's either can't help himself and he lies every time his lips are moving, or he's crazy, or there's a third possibility. He's setting the stage for when he loses. And then he could say, you see, I told you that the crowds weren't real. I told you that she didn't have all those supporters. They weren't real people. And their votes, they're not real either. It's one of those things, or a combination of all three. But this man is the worst thing that ever happened to the Republican Party. And most sensible people know that. The most loyal MAGA crowd shows him a loyalty that he would never show them. And if he loses, they will be partially responsible for not holding him accountable.
Yeah, you made an interesting point a second ago when you said that he may be setting the stage for another loss. That's what I've heard that that same argument made for explaining why he's still going after Georgia Republican Governor Brian Kemp, acting like he kind of screwed up last time and then it may happen again because Trump lost Georgia. Do you think that's what he's doing? I mean, I'm sure some of it's just that personal grudge. Kemp's one of the few people in the party who didn't put up with his nonsense, relatively few. But it seems like do you think he's actually setting the stage to be able to blame this if he loses Georgia again?
Look, if you're asking me, I think besides being a congenital liar, I do think he's crazy. Look, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. That I hope goes without saying. But I think there's something really wrong with him. I don't think he's all there. I think there's something mentally wrong with Donald Trump, okay? And that's not a political statement. I like a lot of his policies, but I think he's nuts. But do I think he's capable of being aware that he's in deep trouble and may lose the election and can't acknowledge that he's a loser? And he is a loser too. We know that he lost in 2020, he lost midterms in 2018, he lost the Senate in 2021. He's a loser. He can't admit that. Is he capable of coming up with this convoluted theory that, well, the only reason I lost is because they cheated? Of course, he's going to do that under any circumstance. But is it possible that he's laying the groundwork for that? Yeah, it's possible. I think crazy solves a lot of problems here, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, it's one quick point before I go on to the next segment. I talked about whether or not policies matter anymore. I think, and I should clarify, I think situations certainly matter, environments certainly matter. So, one of the things that was really hurting Biden doesn't seem to be hurting Harris as much, but I think it probably still weighs in, is that they look at the inflation situation, they see who it went down under, and it's interesting because they don't really see, and I've asked a few people this sometimes, when they talk about how high inflation is, they said, I asked, well, what do you think, what is Biden doing that's causing this? And most people don't know. I mean, there is a legitimate answer that he has made matters worse. I think what some people forget is that this really started as the recovery from the pandemic hit and the whole globe hit a lot of this. He's definitely made it worse with extra spending. I don't think it would have been any different under Trump because he's a huge spender too. But it's so people are talking about the policies. Trump says, he's going to take inflation down, but then he's talking about imposing these crippling tariffs that will only drive inflation up. And I think so much of it is just lost on people. They kind of see, this is the situation I'm at. This is who's in power. Something's got to change. Or if they, start to see things in a better situation, maybe they're okay with the status quo. I don't know, but that's sort of a take I have. What do you think, Bertie?
Well, look, let's say you have two sets of friends. You agree with friend A and you disagree on issues with friend B. Friend A is a total pain in the ass, a negative, down, always looking down, and he's negative all the time, but you agree with what he has to say. And you don't agree with friend B, but he's a pleasant kind of guy. I'm going out to dinner with friend B, okay? And I think a lot of voters are going to choose Kamala Harris because she's, and by the way, let's acknowledge that she's doing all this with a compliant media. Let's see how long that lasts. It may last a lot longer than we think, by the way. She comes off, as you said earlier, as upbeat and friendly and nice, or words to that effect. Trump is the opposite. Moderate voters. Look, the fact that he's nasty and mean-spirited and all that doesn't matter to his base. They don't care. But to moderate voters, people who are still on the fence, these are different kinds of people. Anything that the MAGA crowd really, really likes, moderate, undecided voters in key battleground states really, really don't like. And that attitude, that dark, nasty attitude, calling her stupid, low IQ, acting as if he's in third grade and calling her Kamala, whatever the hell he's calling her now. Normal people don't like that. Normal people don't like that. Nonpartisan normal people don't like that. And that's going to work in her benefit and against him. And right now, going back to question one, right now, not a prediction because we don't know what's going to happen down the road. He continues acting that way, he's going to lose.
Yeah, and I don't think you can really underestimate the likability factor. Biden didn't have that going for him. It's not like that people thought he was a jerk, and some did. I kind of saw a lot of the jerkiness of Biden, but he just didn't have the capacity to be able to present well, to present the energy, and things are different now. But I was going to get back to just one more thing on policies. Both sides have been doing lots of flip-flopping on policies since this campaign started. Harris is obviously doing it much faster since she doesn't have much time and she's trying to shed all these things that could hurt her. Again, I'm not sure voters seem to care, just about the presentation. But it's interesting too. I think with Biden gone, Trump is left in this situation. He obviously did not expect Biden to get out, but he sort of comes across, I think, to a lot of people as now the crotchety old man in the race who sort of feels like yesterday's news. And I don't think, obviously, the election isn't over by any means. Harris could have a big stumble. She's been avoiding press conferences, avoiding interviews. I think because it's working for her to do that, I don't think it's a good thing for the country necessarily, but it's a good thing for her campaign. But she could do one of these. She could do one of these press conferences, do an interview, and just completely blow it. Then again, big events can change everything. You had brought up the point, Bernie, where Trump has to change in order for the situation to change. Do you think, besides personality-wise, he can do anything else at this point to help himself, or is it just really just how he presents himself?
I don't think he's capable of change. I don't think he's capable of doing what's in his best interest. If he were, he'd act differently. Your point about, here's the biggest single point. He's not running against Joe Biden anymore, because when he was, all the things I've said just in this no BS zone today, not to mention the things I've written about what I don't like about Donald Trump, it didn't matter because Joe Biden was so obviously not up to the job of being president of the United States. Certainly not for 4 more years. That Trump was going to win, but he's not running against Joe Biden anymore. He's running against a 59-year-old woman of color who's upbeat and optimistic, even if it's an act. And Donald Trump is now playing the role Joe Biden once played, the old white guy. Yesterday's news, one of the things I'm saying in the column that's going to go up in a few days is Donald Trump is getting stale. It's an old act. How many times do we need to hear that the election was stolen? How many times? Even his fans must be getting tired of that. He's yesterday, she's tomorrow. That doesn't bode well for Donald Trump or the Republican Party.
Right, and we say this, we get new subscribers all the time, and one of the new ones came in and was like, "Wow, you guys are really down on Trump. You must really like Harris." No, we're not into the Democrat side either. We're just when we analyze the election, we call it as we see it. We don't. I don't.
John, thank you for making that point. Let me make clear, I'm speaking for myself, and John can speak for himself. I will not vote for Kamala Harris under any circumstances. I used to be a Democrat before most of you were even born. I was a Democrat. Jimmy Carter, Democrat. I became a Republican years later, and then the Republican Party got so freaking crazy. I wrote my local election board a letter saying, I'm no longer a Republican. They took me off the rolls. I'm now an unaffiliated voter. Democrats don't represent my values. Republicans basically do, at least some of them. I would have voted for Chris Christie or Nikki Haley in a New York minute, but not Donald Trump. And I'm not voting for any Democrat, and that includes Kamala Harris. So please don't misunderstand that.
Yeah, no, we get that. We get new people in here who don't seem to really kind of understand, where we're at. Yeah, obviously the Democratic Party, I see I can think of maybe one thing where policy-wise I'm more aligned with them, and that's Ukraine. But even a lot of Republicans are pro-Ukraine. It's in that party that people are, kind of doing a lot of weird things. It's definitely not the party of Reagan when it comes to some of these foreign issues. But
people need to understand, because we live in hyper-partisan political and media times, that this is not the place for hyper-partisan media. I will tear down Joe Biden or Kamala Harris whenever I think they deserve it. It's an opinion, obviously. You could disagree with it or agree with it, but I will also tear down Republicans when I think they've acted against their best interest. People aren't used to that. You're supposed to be on one side or the other. Sorry. I'm a conservative. I'd like to be a Republican again, but not under the current circumstances.
Well said. And the no BS zone is not the cable news model. And we understand, like Bernie said, a lot of people are used to the cable news model, but that's not what you're going to get here. So Bernie, you wrote a column on Monday making a couple predictions on what will happen, not in the lead up to the election, but after the election, after the November election. Can you describe what those predictions are?
I'm almost embarrassed because they're so obvious, except to the partisans. If Kamala Harris loses, we will definitely hear screams from her side about how she lost because of racism and sexism. How do we know that? Because that's what they always do. They're already doing it. If you mispronounce her name, it's Kamala Harris. If you say Kamala Harris, you're a bigot, So we know that's going to happen. The second prediction that we know for sure, at least I do, is that Donald Trump is going to say the election was stolen from him. He is. He can't acknowledge that he's a loser, which he is also. I'm not saying he's going to lose this time around. He may win. He may figure out a way to win. She may figure out a way to lose. But if he loses, it's going to be in his mind and in the minds of his gullible, supporters that he lost because, once again, they stole the election from him. That's the only thing I'm sure of. I've looked ahead and I've seen the future. I've seen the future, and it's depressing because it looks a lot like the past.
It's funny you brought up the point about mispronouncing Kamala's name. I don't think people realize, for people my age group, I'm a Gen Xer. It's actually particularly hard to keep her name straight because there was a very popular pro wrestler in the 80s named Kamala, and I believe he was billed as a headhunter or something like that. But it's his actual real name is, his last name is Harris. So his name is Kamala Harris, but it's a whole thing. We always have to take pause because Kamala should not be that hard to remember, but it is for pro wrestling.
The reason it is hard to remember, of all the people I've ever met in my life, of all the people I've ever read about, whether it's Jesus, George Washington, Donald Trump, everybody I've ever read about or heard about in my entire life, I've only heard of one person who spells her name Kamala. So if it's Kamala, fine. I try to do it every time. But if I say Kamala, give me a break, okay? Cut me a little slack, for Christ's sake, for crying out loud, excuse me.
Oh no, yeah, and I'm not sure I'm even pronouncing her running mate's last name. I keep saying Waltz or Walls, and it's not. There's no disrespect intended in any of it. But to wrap things up, Bernie, you wanted to talk a little about. And this is something we've talked about a few times, but we've seen some evolution of sorts on this topic. The anti-Israel protests and the potential riots, a number of people including you, have been sort of predicting or thinking about for the upcoming Democratic convention. Do you still think we're going to see much of that, or do you think, in a weird way, Harris has sort of been walking even more of a tightrope, I would think, on this issue than Biden was? She's kind of thrown a little bit of a bone to the left more so than Biden has. Do you think having her now as the nominee will lower the chances of something like that happening at the Democratic convention?
Absolutely not. They don't like her. The hard left, the pro-Palestinian, at times pro-Hamas, anti-American left, the people who will show up and cause chaos at the convention, they don't like her any more than they like Joe Biden. And I mean, not even a little more. They're calling her Killer Kamala. They called him Genocide Joe. So no, the answer is absolutely not. She's not going to catch a break from these people. Here's what I do think. I think there's a possibility that the conventional wisdom about how it's going to hurt the Democrats, how it may be wrong, because 1968, anti-war demonstrators clashed with police while Hubert Humphrey was inside the convention hall. Humphrey lost, Nixon won. The Democratic Party looked like it was a party of chaos, not a good look. Kamala Harris has an opportunity to come off as strong and principled. If she goes after the hard left, they're not going to vote for her anyway. I mean, not the hard left, but the demonstrators aren't going to vote for her anyway. And she may figure that the hard left in Michigan or in the Democratic Party, they're not going to vote for Donald Trump, and they probably won't sit home fearing a Donald Trump victory. This is an opportunity for her to stand up, a sister soldier type moment, and go after the demonstrators on grounds that they're anti-American, that they're not simply pro-Palestinian, but pro-Hamas. If she does that, that's another thing that's going to help her win the election. You follow what I'm saying?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You follow what I just said?
Okay, yeah, no, she said, interestingly enough, a few days ago, she was doing a speech somewhere and she was being shouted down, and she did actually stand up to the protesters a little bit.
Exactly. Go ahead, John. That's a very good example.
Yeah, they were basically shouting over her, calling her names, and she kind of made the point, unless you guys want Donald Trump to be the president, tell me that if that's what you want. Otherwise, let me talk because it's my turn. And I was like, that's not that was not a little bad pushback. It wasn't super strong, but it was something.
But I think it was a foreshadowing of what we may, I want to emphasize may, because I don't know what she's going to do, but that could be a foreshadowing of what we may see in Chicago in a few days. That kind of standing up to them.
One last thing. Do you think, Bernie, we're going to see her starting to finally do some of these interviews and press conferences? She's been avoiding them because I think it's been working for her, but I can't imagine it could hold out too much longer. What do you think?
I can tell you that conservatives, both in and out of the media, aren't going to be happy with whatever she does. If she sat down for an interview with Sean Hannity,
No.
you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay, then she may get some points for that. But if she sits down with ABC, NBC, or CBS, or CNN, or certainly MSNBC, what are they going to say? The interviewer is going to have to try to maintain some credibility by asking a few tough questions. But I would prefer, if I were totally neutral in this, I would prefer to see her at a news conference and not a one-on-one interview, because whoever she picks won't be satisfactory to her political opponents.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Well, that's a good thing, a good place to wrap things up. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and please leave your comments. Let us know what topics you'd like to talk about. We have taken some of your topics and talked about them on this show. Bernie, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Just tell your friends. We've been getting more people. I don't know if it's because of what John and I are doing on our, and people are noticing it, or if our patrons and subscribers are telling your friends. But if it's you, thank you. If it isn't, help us out.
Excellent, excellent. All right, Bernie, you have a great day.
You too, John.